welcome back to Frostbite's G.I. Joe Repro. So we're here today to look at a interview that was conducted between Toyfare copy editor Tom Root and Mr. Larry Hama. It featured in Toyfare Magazine's May 1998 issue. I only just recently come across it. I really quite liked it. Some of the questions that were asked and some of the answers that we got from Larry were just really concise and clear about his direction at the time. So in 1998, just rolling off G.I. Joe's work, it was just really nice to hear some of these answers that he come up with. And the thing with the interview was that it was conducted and then printed in a magazine. So, in today's world, 2024, we're not doing a whole bunch of reading. We're not going back and checking these old interviews as much with people. So I really wanted to bring this interview to life on YouTube. And we're going to do this in two different sections. So the interview itself, like the first part of it was the actual interview between Tom Root and Larry Hama. And then Larry actually gave his top 10 figures that he loves and also his top 5 figures that he didn't have a lot of time for at the time. So, let's go through the interview first. And how we're going to do that is, and like I just said, it was in a magazine. So, how we're going to do this is I'm going to ask the questions that Tom Root asked Larry Hama. And I've got my very special text-to-speech friend that is the closest to Larry Hama's voice that I could find giving us the answers. I just felt this was the best way to do it, best way to present it to you guys. I could have just read the whole thing out, but I thought, man, that would just be boring. So anyway, let's crack on with the interview. I hope you like it. And then straight after the interview, we'll crack into Larry's list of his top 10 and his worst 5. So here we go. The questions were, so Toyfare first asked, Larry, at what point did you get involved with the 1980s G.I. Joe toy line?
Hasbro made a deal with Marvel to do the comic before they even actually had a physical toy to show us. They were completely in the development stage, but they knew they wanted a Marvel comic. So Jim Shooter went down the hall and asked every writer if they wanted to do it, and every editor if they wanted to handle it. I was the last person they asked. Even though I was an editor at Marvel at the time, I wasn't getting any writing work. Every editor said, "You're a peculiar. You're not a writer." Therefore, I had a special dispensation from Shooter to write comics for another company, while I was an editor at Marvel. I think I was the only person who ever had that. G.I. Joe fell to me because I was the only one who would do it. At the meeting with Hasbro, Archie Goodwin, Jim Shooter, Nelson Yomtov, and Denny O'Neil were there. They had these very sort of vague character sketches of 10 characters. Archie asked, "Well, we don't have one." And we said, "What are these guys going to do? Just sort of march around and have maneuvers and stuff?" We talked Hasbro into the fact that they had to have an opponent. I think it was Archie who just off the top of his head said, "Yeah, we'll call them something like Cobra."
Toyfare then asked, so what was your input in creating the Joes?
Hasbro had no names for these characters. They had a picture of a guy that said Infantryman and a picture of another guy that said Covert Operations Specialist or something. I took the whole package home and wrote up the first bunch of dossiers. As far as I know, I created the concept of putting dossiers on the backs of toy packages, which has become an industry standard. In fact, everybody has been copying my form. One paragraph would give you a solid background, name, age, where this guy is from, and then the second paragraph succinctly gives you an inkling of his personality, a little anecdote related by a fellow team member. That was the real key. To write it so that a 6 or 7-year-old kid reading it could read it absolutely straight and think it was a totally serious military fantasy, but an adult reading it would get the other side of the joke.
Toyfare then asked, so original characters like Duke and Snake Eyes and Scarlet, those were all your creations?
I gave them their names and put the characters on their feet. I did not create the visual, but I created the personalities. For Scarlet, Hasbro had a picture of this girl, and she had red hair, and she was carrying a crossbow, and I had to figure out what that was all about. The Destro thing, they said, all right, well, we'll give this guy a silver mask and blah, blah, blah. And he was some sort of arms dealer. I had to take some bare bones stuff like that and really try to flesh it out and try to then fit it into a universe and have it all make some sort of sense.
Toyfare then asked, so which came first, the toys or the comic book?
It was all simultaneous. The comic series was a way to get around the restriction on the amounts of animation allowed in a toy commercial. I believe you can only have like 8 or 10 seconds of animation in a 30-second toy spot. The rest of it has to be real pictures of the actual toy. But a really bright guy at Hasbro figured out one day that if you have a printed publication and you buy advertising for that publication, they can't restrict how you advertise it because the publication's protected by the First Amendment. So you happen to have a comic book that just happens to have all the toys that you want to promote. Hasbro said, okay, you make this deal with us to license G.I. Joe as a comic book, and we'll throw in 4 commercials a year for the comics. Every 3rd issue would be a TV spot. That way they were able to create 30-second commercials for the comics. And I think these were the first comics that ever had TV commercials, totally animated, totally gonzo, totally action-packed from start to finish. Hasbro would have all the toys they wanted to promote, plus we would get the benefit of having these TV commercials for our comic. And boy, we sold a lot of comics. The challenge was that Hasbro would do the commercial first, and then I would have to write the comic that fit this commercial. So of course they wouldn't try to do a story in a commercial. They were just great action scenes. Hasbro would promote a G.I. Joe SEL trooper and a scuba guy at the same time. They were promoting an ice or snow vehicle and a hang glider and desert vehicle. That all looks great smashed together in a commercial. But then you've got to write a single story with scuba diving and deserts and snow stalking. Whoa!
Toyfare asked, what sort of involvement did you have in the animated series?
None. It was out of California, and they have their own list of network-approved writers. If you're not on that list, and it's a short list, forget it. Saturday morning shows would all use the same list. That's why all the shows were the same. And safe. Real safe.
They then asked, did you feel restricted writing a comic book series so heavily tied into a toy line?
No. My restrictions applied only to the 4 comics a year that they would do advertising. I think that was only in the first 2 years of the line in which they did those commercials. For the rest of it, I had pretty much carte blanche. I had more freedom writing G.I. Joe than I've had writing anything else. Mainly because I came up with all these characters, and I was actually the only real authority on them. I think I went through like 8 or 9 editors during the run, and almost every year the liaison at Hasbro would change. So every 18 months or so, I was dealing with a whole new batch of people on both sides who knew absolutely nothing about GL Joe. If there was ever any question, they would have to come to me, which also made it difficult for anybody to do a fill-in. In a way, I made myself sort of indispensable to the line. Lord knows they tried to get around it. 5 or 6 years down the pike, Hasbro decided that paying me to write the dossiers was way too expensive, and they were going to just get somebody in-house to do it. It didn't take them too long to figure out that it was a lot harder to do. They had to come back to me.
They then asked, what was the concept to toy to comic process like?
What was good about the whole relationship was that Hasbro would design the visual, and it was my job to take whatever they'd come up with and put some logic to it, to try to figure out some way to explain why this ridiculous thing made sense within the parameters of this particular universe. Sometimes I just couldn't do it.
Toyfare then asked, what were some of Hasbro's concepts you simply could not make sense of.
Serpenter was something that I thought was really dicey to begin with. I gave it my best shot when GL Joe started getting on the fringe of being supernatural. I think that's when it always went askew, when Hasbro tried to get too freaky with it. I told them there was a certain sort of real-world logic to this type of fantasy that you have to stick to. You can't really jump. The boundary's on it. The Dreadnoks were originally going to be sort of knockoffs of the Ewoks, cute furry teddy bear bad guys running around. And I said, wait, you can't have the good guys shooting these teddy bears. Stop and think about this. That's the one I really went to the war with. I said, look, you can't do this. You've got to make them, like, obnoxious bikers or something. Luckily, they relented.
Toyfare then confirmed that the Dreadnoks were going to be Ewoks.
Return of the Jedi had just come out, and everybody had gone Ewoks crazy. I said, no, it just doesn't scan.
Toyfare then asked, were there any other ridiculous ideas like that?
There were a few characters that they tried and made to shove at me that I flatly refused to use. I said, no, you can have them in there, but I won't write them. If you want them, fire me off the book and get somebody else to write these characters. Like the Cobra team in Globulus, characters in the G.I. Joe movie feature. I thought the movie was so wretched that I just flatly refused. There were other edicts that I had to bite the bullet and go along with until they came to their senses. One year, Hasbro sent us a fax that said, these covers are way too violent. From now on, no more guns on the covers. And we said, what? Are they just going to be standing around waving at each other? What are we going to do? I think the art that caused it all was the most nonviolent cover that we ever actually had. It featured Roadblock holding this massive 50 caliber machine gun, dominating the cover. Really cool. But guess it was so cool that it scared the hell out of them.
He then asked, so Hasbro had input in the comic series all the time?
Yeah, there were things I just couldn't talk them out of. In the G.I. Joe feature film, for instance, they had Cobra Commander die. One day we got this edict that said, Cobra Commander dies in the movie, so you have to kill him off in the comics. And we said, wait a minute, that's like killing off Dr. Doom or Magneto. Even though he's a bad guy, he's an extremely popular character. They said, well, it has to match the movie continuity. So we killed him off. Thousands of people wrote in and said that they would never buy the comic again.
He then confirmed that Cobra Commander had something of a rabid following, didn't he?
There aren't that many characters in comics that are nicely over the top. Cobra Commander was fun because he was so nasty, and at the same time he could be really eloquent. I really saw him as somebody who was fascinated by the sound of his own voice. I pictured him speaking in, oddly enough, the voice of conservative mouthpiece William F. Buckley. Whenever I was writing Cobra Commander dialogue, I was sort of like, well, how would Bill Buckley say this? And that usually gave me the inspiration to come up with something.
He then asked, even when you were up past 100 issues, did your relationship with Hasbro ever change?
I always had a very good relationship with Hasbro, compared to almost any other toy license. Lord knows we dealt with a lot of toy licenses at Marvel. The average life of a toy license isn't very long. I might be wrong, but I think Joe has a record for a licensed toy comic. If you go 3 years, that's considered a long time. GL Joe lasted 14 years.
He then asked, have you ever done any non-G.I. Joe toy work?
I wrote all the dossiers for Hasbro's Cops. The Cops animated series only lasted 2 seasons. That was actually fun because they said, it's okay to be really wacky with this. I got to make up some funny stuff, I thought.
Tom then confirmed that Larry designed Bucky O'Hare.
Bucky O'Hare, I created from the ground up in the 70s. It took a long time, something like 12 or 14 years, to get it off the ground. The thing that always bugged me about toys was that they would never match the comic or movie. When I designed the Bucky characters, I knew that they all had to have 3 millimeter holes in the bottom of their feet. So I told Bucky O'Hare illustrator Michael Golden that all the comic book characters had to have 3 millimeter holes in the bottoms of their feet. And since it's impractical to mold three-dimensional holsters to put their stuff in, we're going to design these characters so that they would have 3 millimeter plugs sticking out of their belts, and all the weapons would have 3 millimeter holes as well. You don't have to make any compromises. The continuity and reality is really consistent. I guess I was an overly protected kid, but that was important to me, and I figured it was probably important to a lot of kids.
He then asked, how did he explain the holes in the feet?
We didn't. I mean, you don't have to explain that stuff. The whole concept was about a live-action kid who gets sucked into this animated universe. This was way before Roger Rabbit. But we had a TV show and toy line that sold plenty of licenses, so I can't complain.
Tom then asked, where did all of Larry's military knowledge come from?
I was in the Army from 1969 to 1971. By the time I was doing Joe, almost everything had changed. I had to go back and get reference and really study up. A lot of the standard operating procedures had changed. I figured certain real stuff and procedures had to be as accurate as possible. Ranks and methodology of operations had to be pretty close.
And lastly, he asked, how did Larry view the portrayal of American soldiers in G.I. Joe?
Was very concerned about showing it from a real grunt point of view. If there was any inadvertent flag waving, I never saw it as being that way. The Joes were always doing, in my mind, a dirty job, and the powers that be that fed them the assignments were guys who really didn't care about them. They were always getting the short end of the stick. I thought it was important not to give kids the idea that the military was some sort of neat heroic fantasy, that the heroism was personal and had nothing to do with patriotism. Heroism in combat and loyalty in the battlefield has to do with your relationship to the 5 other guys in the squad first, and then way down the line maybe loyalty to the flag. And you had to make the foe a real person. It was important for Cobra to have character and personalities and to believe in what they were doing, to show the viewpoint that you are fighting people who may believe just as strongly in what they are doing as you do, that they are not ciphers. It is not about knocking down nameless targets.
Okay, so that was the interview with Larry by Tom from Toyfare Magazine. I actually found some really great points in there that I hadn't heard before about Larry. So that's why I wanted to share it with you guys. And now the really fun part is, and this was the part that I was super interested in, was getting Larry Hama's top 10 out of all the figures leading up to 1998. And don't actually take it too much on the figure side of things, as in the variants or the Vs. Just note the actual characters. I think that's where he took a lot of his pleasure from, and his job was creating these characters and giving them just magnificent backstories. So let's do it. Let's do this top 10. So at number 10, we've got Tunnel Rat. Larry noted that Tunnel Rat was sculpted after him. He said there are a bunch of G.I. Joes that the sculptors actually went and took photographs and sketches and made them actually look like real people. Um, you know, it's such a great thing to have shows like The Toys That Made Us on Netflix, because we're hearing stories like this. I certainly hadn't heard that bit of information before watching that Toys That Made Us. And I wasn't aware of, this interview, and I'm sure it was probably discussed in other interviews with Larry, but I hadn't seen it before watching Toys That Made Us. So, yeah, it was just a great piece of info when I first heard it. Next up, Zartan. So Larry noted that he got into a lot of trouble with Zartan. He said in the original dossier, he noted that Zartan was a paranoid schizophrenic, and all these support and self-help groups for the mentally ill complained to Hasbro. Hasbro had to pull the package and redo the dossier. So yeah, that's been noted before recently, and we're aware of all that. But it's great that he's, noting Zartan in his top 10. And it's a cool bit of information about Zartan. Next up at number 8, we had the entirety of the Dreadnoks. And Larry noted in this interview that the Dreadnoks are just fun and nasty. He said that he likes guys that just drink grape soda and eat chocolate covered donuts and ride around on motorcycles. And how could you not love them? Yeah, it's such a great description. They're a fun set of dudes. Yeah. All right, number 7, the Baroness. So Larry noted that he originally saw her as being a sort of a disaffected rich girl, sort of a Patty Hearst, when he started teaming her up with Destro and creating a relationship between them. He tweaked her character to make her a little bit more complex. And you can sort of see that in the comics. Like you can see Baroness was a lot of the time just this, little rich girl type thing, like a baroness. Um, but you did start to see a change occur in her where she started to become this bit more of a battle ready soldier. Number 6, Destro. Um, so Larry noted that Cobra Commander knows he's bad and revels in it. Destro has his own set of scruples. He actually sees himself as being a fairly honourable guy. He's carrying a lot of family tradition and he has his own integrity, but there's a degree of self delusion to him. And a lot of these, it's really awesome to me that you're getting the guy that creates these characters, and he's coming out with these descriptions, and this is sort of what you think of those characters. So that means that Larry's done such a fantastic job of presenting these characters in such a way that you get exactly what he's trying to portray to you. Okay, so that's Destro. Number 5, Cobra Commander. And he just noted he's just so over the top. He loves him. Um, just loving the fact that Cobra Commander was a used car salesman before he became this dude trying to take over the world. It's just great. Number 4, Scarlet. Larry noted that Scarlet is a completely competent female soldier. He used to get a lot of letters from girls about the fact that she was never treated any differently from any of the guys. Scarlet never stood around holding her hands to her head, going, eek. Yeah, it's very, very noted. Female soldiers such as Lady J, Scarlet, Cover Girl, they are totally independent female soldiers in the G.I. Joe line, and it's great to see. Number 3, Stalker. Larry noted that Stalker is the voice of reason. He's an emotional character, but he doesn't get over emotional. He's a loyal guy and he has an interesting past. And Larry sort of lamented on the fact that he never got a chance to go into it with the comics. Number 2, Storm Shadow. So Larry noted that Storm Shadow was a problematic guy. He had an incredible tragedy happen to him, and he's had to work his whole life to get around it. Dark characters are interesting because they've got all this baggage to work out. And yeah, you can definitely know with Storm Shadow, he's got a lot of baggage. So that's number 2. No, it only leaves number 1, which is Snake Eyes. Larry noted, what's great about Snake Eyes is the fact that it's a mystery as to what he looks like, so anybody could identify with him. He's a character of tremendous loyalty. No matter what mess you get in, Snake Eyes will never leave you out there. That's fantastic. Okay, so after his top 10 in the interview with Toyfare Magazine, um, and Toyfare actually labeled, so it labeled the top 10 to be the good, And then he actually labeled these 5 characters the bad and the ugly. Um, and I know that this is a 1998 interview, so I took that bad and ugly out because, people are sensitive these days. And I just label this the Nopes. Yeah, let's go through this 5. So at number 5, he labeled the entire DEF force, so the villains and the heroes, and said I couldn't fit them into the fantasy. It just bugged the hell out of me. I don't remember their names. I blocked them out entirely. And I can totally see where he's coming from with this. There's some really good figures in there, being, the headhunter, or headhunters. But yeah, a lot of these figures, and this one is the example, this mutton junkyard variant. Just, I got no time for them. I don't want them in my collection. They're not great. Um, and I know you might be watching this and thinking to yourself, "Oh, but I like DF." That's cool, man. Enjoy. They're all yours. Duke was a bit of a surprise for me to have in this list from Larry Hama. Larry noted that Duke never really gelled in his head, made him the first sergeant, but he never really fulfilled that purpose. The company commander is like the good cop, and the first sergeant is the bad cop. Duke just always seemed like an afterthought. Um, I sort of touched on it a bit, talking about issue number 109 recently in my G.I. Joe Deaths episode, where in that 109, Duke just seems like a demon possessed. Um, so he starts, even though people are dying around him, he just doesn't fall to the ground. He's not crying like the other troops around him. He just, he's got no shirt on. It's been blasted off. He's still got his bandolier. His pants are torn. And he is just saying, soldier, there is no time for this right now. Get in and complete your mission. And just that 109 was, I felt, a lot of a change in attitude of Duke from a lot of other issues in the line. So, yeah, I can totally see where Larry's coming from with this. Um, Noting that as well, though, Larry was writing these. So um, I think it's one thing to say, never really gelled with him in your head, but you were writing the material. So, yeah. Interesting, though. Interesting how the artist slash writer is seeing a particular character. Next up, the fridge. And, when I saw him on this list, I thought, yeah, why not? Like, why wouldn't you expect him to be on this list? Larry noted that there wasn't much that he could do with him in the comic. I don't even know if I ever used him. I couldn't figure out what to do with him within the context of the story. I just said, hey, I can't deal with this. And yeah, fair enough, bro. Fair enough. Because, gimmicky as hell. Just blatant gimmick. Sergeant Slaughter was a surprise to see on the list. He said, I wasn't crazy about the idea of Sergeant Slaughter either. Then I actually met him, and he was like a nice guy, total difference of what he portrayed in the wrestling ring. So, yeah, even though he's on the list, that's the character, not Sergeant Slaughter himself, not Remus himself. Yeah. And number 1, Serpentor. Larry just noted I wasn't ever crazy about him. And I, reading through this interview and seeing how Larry talks about the movie, I sort of felt maybe, um, yeah, wasn't ever crazy about him. But yeah, interesting. So that's it for this coverage of Larry Hama's 1998 interview with Toyfare. Um, Please let me know in the comments if you'd actually firstly heard of this interview before, you'd seen it before, and let me know what you thought about the interview. Like I said, I found a lot of components of it interesting, and that's why, like I said, I wanted to share it with you guys today. Um, Let me know what you thought of the using the text to speech part of this video. Uh, Saying to my missus, I felt like a bit of a mad scientist pulling that together, but I felt it would just be a lot less boring doing it that way than me actually just reading the whole interview and then, or showing you the interview on slides. So yeah, let me know what you thought of that, so I know whether to maybe do it again in the future or don't do it again. If you're not currently subscribed to my account, please hit that sub button. I want to thank everyone for your, just resounding support in my latest GI Joe deaths video. The numbers of people just watching it and liking it and leaving comments were phenomenal, and I truly appreciate the support for my channel. Um, if you enjoyed this content today, hit that like button, leave me a comment. Let me know. Let me know if you like it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.